scientific observation, scientific conclusion, scientific hypothesis as three separate, in a way, controls of science. Whenever we're encountering something scientifically, we must begin with observation. We have to quantify the observable, recognizing the parts of the observable we understand enough to draw conclusions about, parts that we understand enough to hypothesize about, and parts we can recognize as beyond our understanding, including recognizing what we're not observing, that we're aware that there are factors or influences, controls, variables beyond our awareness within scientific concepts that we don't understand yet. An example of this in the climate scientists' version or practice is awareness of things that have been called the chaos theory or the butterfly effect, that small changes in one place can produce large changes in other places, and those changes resulting in shifts and occurrences can be so small that we may never really become aware of what they truly are. Those triggers of existence, those I could say inputs and outputs of reality, I suppose. So all of this is to the point or the thesis that when biases or a lack of objectivity, emotion becomes a factor in the scientific process or practice of an individual, without also measuring those things as part of the scientific process, you quickly come into something that appears to be following the scientific model of inquiry. However, in reality, there is a completely separate set of observances and practices within the individual practicing the science that are influencing or creating the viewpoints of that person, the conclusions, the observations, and the hypotheses which come out of them are more a product of who they are internally than of a purely scientific model of inquiry without any human input or output. So the input being the differences of individual within the practice, and the output being the production of the scientific model of inquiry by the use of an individual being accepted within the scientific community and presenting influence there. The conclusions, hypotheses, and observations of the individual becoming part of the collective scientific expression of humanity. That's the output. So we're kind of lacking in our scientific model of inquiry. You could say that attached to observations should go the profile, the psychiatric or psychological or human, right? Like you're not reducing someone to just one field of discipline's views on the matter. Like if this person maybe is involved in, maybe they use illegal substances, maybe they got injured at one point, mentally or physically, they got a medication that helped them recover, they developed a dependence on the homeostasis induced by the medication, or perceived homeostasis within the individual, and now they continue to procure the substance through non-legal means. That that could connect that person to all kinds of positions, perceptions, kinds of influence that could have bearing on small pieces of their conclusions, which could produce consequences that are far larger than the initial event. The event being that input into science of an individual participating in scientific practices professionally. So I guess my point in all of this is that to improve the scientific model of inquiry, an accurate system of measurement of the spiritual, mental, emotional, biological state of the individual practicing the science attached to the scientific model of inquiry in use within the practical portion of their scientific practice would produce, in an aggregated sense, something larger and more immediately measurable than a random iteration of what we could call the butterfly effect. Random being not measured. So it's random to us because we're not measuring it. We're not engaging with these random inputs into science because we're not measuring them. So it becomes random. Yes, there's this discovery over here, but it's attached to these personal viewpoints. Just as an illustration, there's a well-known researcher who participated in, I believe, climate sciences as his field of study, who wrote a book recently that was on the New York Times bestseller list, I think. He was in competition for the Nobel Peace Prize, and he writes a lot about the personal state he was in while pursuing this prestigious award, and his perspective on himself and the scientific community in its, I guess you could say, like, natural and supernatural state, the observable physical and the inexpressible human characteristics that go beyond the merely physically measurable, right? That's what human is. We can see what's natural. We also see what appears to be beyond the natural, where like a person will charge into a burning house to save a child, risking their own life, or like someone lifts a car up off somebody in an accident to get them out, or just like craziness that occurs that it just kind of isn't animal. It goes beyond instinct of self-preservation and demonstrates humanity. So that's my thesis, my conclusion, my observation of science. That's my conclusion upon it, and my hypothesis is that an additional system of measurement of individuals attached to the application of the scientific model of inquiry would result in a far more accurate aggregation of concepts that are proved or concluded upon by science, and remove some of the division within fields like climate scientists over, what are accurate conclusions to draw about climate change, what sort of shifts are supposed to be happening, and which sort of shifts are occurring because of human input to the ecosystem, which is becoming so serious that, I've heard people say that we're 50 years too late to deal with the problems in our oceans. I've heard like a person of scientific background say that, but on like a podcast or something, I can't remember. Seems serious. Seems like there's a problem. God bless. Jesus is Lord.